Tonight, the president in Vietnam. The arrival marks the beginning of a historic second summit between an American president and the leader of North Korea.
This as trouble heats up at home, with the president's former fixer, Michael Cohen, set to speak out publicly on Capitol Hill.
And Democrats in the Senate block a bill meant to protect children born alive after a botched abortion.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder.
We begin tonight with a major blow to the pro-life movement in the Senate. All but 3 Democrats voted against a bill that would have required medical care for children born alive after an attempted abortion.
CBN News senior Washington correspondent Paul Strand has reaction from Capitol Hill.
The fact that the U.S. Senate has just failed to approve a bill outlawing infanticide has sent ripples of shock through the pro-life ranks in the House of Representatives. One of those congressmen worked as an obstetrician before becoming a lawmaker.
I could have never in my wildest, worst nightmare have dreamed that I would have to come up here one day and fight harder to protect newborn babies than I did as a physician.
Representative Chris Smith, leader of the House Pro-Life Caucus, says it's unconscionable abortionists are being allowed to take this deadly step when an abortion fails.
They know the unborn child dies when they dismember or chemically poison, but when they survive, they take that next step and they make no effort whatsoever to protect this breathing, gasping, often crying little baby, and that's murder.
These lawmakers pledged to continue pushing to protect these infants every single day until they get a bill voted on in the House.
If Speaker Pelosi feels so strongly about her position that babies ought to be allowed to die on the table, that she should just allow a vote in the House.
Mallory Quigley of the Susan B. Anthony list had poll results that could lead to a political change of heart for those fighting this legislation.
77% of Americans support the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. Only 9% oppose.
Meanwhile, Senate Democrats aren't even close to apologizing for their vote against the Born Alive Act. Their leader, Senator Chuck Schumer, labeled the bill Washington politics at its worst.
So this vote does not occur in a vacuum. It's part of a pattern taken by President Trump and congressional Republicans to limit, deny, or circumscribe a woman's right to health care.
Senator Tina Smith treated it like an assault on doctors and women.
This bill intimidates providers and forces physicians to provide inappropriate medical treatment, even when it's not in the best interests of the patient or her family.
Patrina Mosley of the Family Research Council would like to give one message to women contemplating abortion.
Have you heard of adoption? There's plenty of families out there who want children, who can't have them. And that is a life that is worth saving, that someone else wants. And that's okay if you don't, but someone else does, and that baby deserves to live for that family who's going to love them.
No one knows how far across the nation this move to legalize what some are calling after-birth abortions is going to go. But there's this. The American public seems so shocked by these developments, it's likely to become a big issue in the 2020 elections. Paul Strand, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
Thanks, Paul. Here with us now is Beckett Adams, a commentator for the Washington Examiner. Beckett, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Beckett, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, he called the bill part of a pattern to limit or deny women's rights to health care. What do you think? Is that in line with how most Americans see it?
Well, I think one issue to your second question, how most Americans see it, that's a more nebulous question. I don't know how many more Americans have been following this in the first place. But to his claim that it denies women access to abortive services is total nonsense. We've actually seen this in a couple of newsrooms. Associated Press or Politico have referred to it as an anti-abortion bill, which is deeply disingenuous to refer to it as that. The bill doesn't actually deny any abortion services, and it doesn't block anyone from getting those services. It merely stipulates that anyone who survives an abortion attempt should get medical care that any newborn would get. That's it. It's as simple as that. And trying to play it off like it's some sort of anti-abortion procedure is, again, using the word disingenuous, to put it lightly.
Beckett, only 3 of the senators who vote with a Democratic bloc of 47 voted against the bill. What's that say about where the Democratic Party is headed?
Not to sound too cynical, but I'm honestly surprised it was as many as 3. I knew we'd get Manchin. I was surprised to see Casey and Jones, Doug Jones out of Alabama and Bob Casey out of Pennsylvania. I guess that's actually the answer to your question. I'm surprised it was even 3. There's not a whole lot of room for blue dog Democrats anymore in the Democratic Party, and there's certainly not a lot of room for pro-life Democrats. We saw that with Tom Perez said a couple of years ago that there's no such thing as a pro-life Democrat. We saw Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, talking about how there's no place for pro-lifers in New York. And then we saw pro-life groups were not banned, but certainly not welcome from the Women's March. It seems to me to be increasingly difficult to call oneself pro-life and also be welcome in the Democratic Party. And so they're going to have to watching this bill crash in the U.S. Senate, a bill as I would think is not as controversial, no, as uncontroversial as banning infanticide. I don't know if there's any room left in the Democratic Party for pro-lifers.
All right, Beckett, again, thank you so much for your time. Great insights.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the president today is in Vietnam, arriving for his meeting with Kim Jong-un, and it sets the stage for an international spectacle. The president and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will officially meet over dinner on Wednesday. Negotiators on both sides are looking to come away from the table with concrete concessions, not just talk. Well, Guy Taylor is the chief foreign correspondent with the Washington Times, and he's traveling with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Vietnam. Guy, I have to say, you look pretty coherent, given that you're probably really jet-lagged. When did you get in, and have you had much of a chance to sleep?
No, yeah, we got in early this morning. Of course, we're 12 hours ahead of you, so it's been kind of a busy day of running around here.
Guy, we know that there is a formal dinner on the schedule along with many meetings. What's on the agenda? What can you tell us about what the two leaders will be doing there in Vietnam?
The big question becomes then what happens in the big climactic moment, which will be Trump's and Kim Jong-un's presumably a press conference on Thursday morning U.S. East Coast time. It'll be Thursday night here, where we really get a sense of whether or not anything got achieved other than another Singapore summit, another meeting where a lot of vague talk of denuclearization comes out. Do they really achieve something? So the big question now is what would be in a joint statement? The U.S. side is considering putting weight behind what could best be described as a peace declaration, basically informally ending the Korean War. Remember, the Korean War was frozen in the early 1950s by an armistice, not a peace treaty. So this peace declaration would be a major step toward a peace treaty, and it would be like a security guarantee to the North Koreans that the U.S. is no longer on a war footing toward them. The problem is, what would the North Koreans give in return? And of course, the Trump administration wants Kim Jong-un to come out and clearly say that he's ready to abandon his nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. But Kim Jong-un wants major sanctions relief. He wants economic aid in exchange for that. So it's really vague when it comes down to what are the North Koreans really willing to put on the table at this point? Are they going to list the sites of their uranium enrichment facilities? Are they going to list all of the sites where they have nuclear weapons stored? Are they going to use the word inspectors in the press conference? Will Kim Jong-un come out and say, well, not only do I agree to pursue denuclearization, but actually I'm willing to consider allowing international inspectors into North Korea? That type of a thing would, even though it might seem small and insignificant in the big picture, that would be a major, major breakthrough.
For the North Koreans, does it look like, and I'm going to use your words, that they're just trying to wear down the U.S. or possibly even wait out the Trump administration's term?
It definitely looks like that could be a possibility. You know, you have to put a lot of faith in Kim Jong-un in this idea that he is this young and different dictator who wants to take North Korea in a totally different direction in the 21st century. You have to put a lot of faith in that to believe that anything other than what you just described is what's happening, which is basically like a kind of kabuki theater where these things just play out. It's a major media splash. Everybody feels happy that there was these peace talks. But at the end of the day, there's no movement on the nuclear question. North Korea continues to grow its nuclear arsenal. North Korea still has intercontinental ballistic missiles. U.S. intelligence claims that North Korea has ballistic missiles small enough to fit on an nuclear weapon small enough to fit on an ICBM that could reach the U.S. homeland. You know, this could be where we're going, that these talks are just around and around in a circle.
Guy, I got to ask you, so you had mentioned North Korea possibly seeking a peace footing. What about the potential of withdrawing U.S. troops from the Korean Peninsula? Is that an option on the table?
You know, the Trump administration, President Trump, in tweets and speeches, has said some broad things about wanting to bring troops home. And I think that a lot of critical media has jumped on that and said, well, he wants to withdraw American troops from everywhere. The South Koreans are nervous about it as well. But I don't think that President Trump has really openly said that troop withdrawal from South Korea, where American troops have been for well over a half a century, that's even on the table at this point.
Guy, final question for you. What does President Trump need to get out of this summit to paint this as a win?
Yeah, so that's the other piece of it. I mean, I think the number one thing he needs is for it to go well enough that negotiations deepen after this, and that he doesn't appear as if he conceded too much to the North Koreans, that you know, he can walk away from this and say, look, they still aren't testing nuclear weapons. They're still not testing ballistic missiles. And in fact, they've given us more clarity. They've said they'll allow inspectors. I think, you know, if it goes like that, President Trump is going to have his critics, obviously, and they're going to be harsh critics that say, look, you're dancing with a dictator. This is no different than the Obama administration working with the Iranian government back in 2015. He's going to face those critics. But I think if he can come out of this and say, no, we're actually moving forward in this, and the North Koreans are showing that they're even more serious about giving up their nuclear weapons, I think he's going to be able to try to claim that as a pretty big success, even if it means that it plays out for the rest of his first term in office.
Guy, you're 12 hours ahead of us on the East Coast, so we want to say thank you, get some rest, and hopefully we'll be able to talk to you tomorrow after the big meeting.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
Well, in other news, the saga of the lone 2018 House race yet to be called saw another twist today. Mark Harris, the Republican candidate who won the disputed race, says he will not run in the newly called election. Just last week, the North Carolina State Board of Elections ended its investigation into voter fraud by a Harris campaign contracted worker, calling for a redo. Harris, citing health concerns, led the vote race against his Democratic opponent, Dan McCready, by 905 votes. Well, it was the first day of testimony on Capitol Hill for President Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Lawmakers say Cohen may hold the key to insight on the president's dealings with Russia. But GOP leaders say you can't believe a word he says. Amber Strong has the latest.
President Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, is in the hot seat again this week, testifying before 3 congressional committees.
What evidence do you have of criminal conduct?
Cohen arrived for his hearing before the Senate Intel Committee Tuesday morning. The man, described as Trump's fixer, pleaded guilty last year to lying to Congress about the president's involvement with a real estate project in Moscow. Democrats want to know what else he's hiding.
What I intend to keep focused on is untangling the very complicated financial arrangements between Donald Trump and Russia.
Multiple outlets are reporting Cohen will outright accuse the president of criminal conduct and ordering him to pay hush money to the president's alleged mistresses. The White House is dismissing Cohen's credibility, stating it's laughable anyone would take a convicted liar like Cohen at his word. And from the GOP, more of the same.
He lied to the committee before. Do you expect him to tell the truth this time?
No.
Now, before it's all said and done, Cohen will testify twice more, once before the House Oversight Committee and once before House Intel. Now, Wednesday's House Oversight testimony will be open to the media so the public can judge for themselves. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, the democratically controlled House passes a resolution to block the president's national emergency declaration on the U.S.-Mexico border. Our one-on-one interview with House Minority Whip Steve Scalise coming up. Welcome back. Well, in a major rebuke to President Trump, the Democrat-controlled House passed a resolution to block the president's national emergency declaration to access funds to build a wall along the southern border.
Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson spoke with House Minority Whip Steve Scalise to discuss why he supports the president's decision and the work he's doing to force a major vote on a pro-life bill in the House.
House Minority Whip Steve Scalise joins many other Republican lawmakers standing behind the president's national emergency declaration and tells CBN News he doesn't know how anyone can look at the border situation and deny there's a major problem.
This is clearly one of those cases where the president can declare an emergency, and he has, because there is a crisis at the border, and he's working to keep our country safe.
Scalise is also calling out Democrats, who he says didn't object when former President Barack Obama used executive orders to put his policies in place.
Democrats were silent there, but all of a sudden when it comes to the national security of this country, which is a constitutional responsibility of the president to keep our country safe, when the president's standing up and taking legal action to do it, now all of a sudden they're wondering if it's allowed. The law actually does allow it. The law goes back to 1976, and it's been used dozens of times.
The Senate will take up the resolution next, where its fate is uncertain. Even if the Senate agrees with the House, the president will surely veto the measure.
We need to put some kind of physical barrier in place. Most people across the country support border security.
Scalise is also trying to bring the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act to the House floor. A similar bill already failed in the Senate this week, as all but 3 Democrats voted against it.
What we're trying to do is put legal protection in place that most people are shocked to find out doesn't already exist in law.
He needs 218 signatures in order to get a vote, a hard number to come by in the Democrat-controlled House.
You find that so many Democrats are afraid to buck Nancy Pelosi. But again, on this issue, I don't understand how you can allow a baby to be born alive and then let it be murdered and think that that should be legal anywhere.
While this bill is unlikely to make it to the president, Republicans want Democrats on the record regarding this issue heading into the 2020 campaign.
This is an issue that even most people who identify themselves as being pro-choice think it's wrong to kill the baby after it's born alive. So this shouldn't be even part of the abortion debate. This should be a protection that's guaranteed everybody in America.
Scalise also told CBN News about getting involved in Wednesday's Supreme Court arguments on the Bladensburg Peace Cross.
This case has real serious implications on grave sites all across this country. If you look at what they're trying to do, they're trying to say that you can't display a cross on a grave site.
Although this case deals solely with this memorial honoring 49 soldiers, Scalise sees a potential major impact. He fears the ruling could eventually determine whether religious symbols will be permitted on headstones in military cemeteries on public land.
Go to Arlington Cemetery, go to any military cemetery, and you see whether it's Star of David or a cross, people that want to be buried and have a religious symbol affixed to their headstone. But ultimately, if we don't get the right ruling from the Supreme Court, it could put at jeopardy all of our cemeteries like Arlington. So it's got a lot of national implications.
The justices could ultimately rule on just this case or ones that are very similar, or issue a broader decision that determines when religious symbols are allowed in the public sphere. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thanks, Abby. And today on the CBN News Daily Rundown podcast, Paul Strand talks about the religious liberty case heading to the Supreme Court Wednesday. It focuses on the Peace Cross, a World War I veterans memorial in Maryland.
And critics say it's unconstitutional because it's a cross. Supporters say crosses marked most graves in those killed in World War I. As discussed in the Daily Rundown, if the court decides this cross has to go, it could affect thousands of other memorials just like it. To tune in, either visit cbnnews.com or your favorite podcast platform.
Well, in the last 2 weeks, sexual abuse scandals have dogged the Southern Baptist and the Catholic Church. This week, another divisive subject ultimately may permanently rupture one mainline Protestant denomination.
The United Methodist Church is debating a ban on gay clergy and same-sex marriage. This evening's scheduled vote in St. Louis wraps up a 3-day special session with more than 800 worldwide delegates. They are deciding between two competing plans. The one is called the traditional plan and would reinforce the church's current position, which states that, quote, the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching, and prohibits active homosexuals from being ordained or appointed to official posts in the United Methodist Church. The other plan is called the One Church Plan and would allow individual churches or regions to decide whether to hire gay pastors or perform same-sex weddings. Whatever the decision, internal and external observers believe it will still lead to a split in the 12 million member church. Well, amid the rancor in Washington, Republicans and Democrats are coming together. Up next, we'll introduce you to one woman helping to bridge the division by addressing an urgent need around the world.
Well, it is hard to believe, but in Washington, there's actually a group of Democrats and Republicans coming together to shine a light on religious persecution around the world.
That's right. Jennifer Wishon introduces us to one woman who believes the group's efforts are making a big difference.
Gail Manchin is the wife of Democrat West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. She's approaching her latest endeavor with families in mind. Families torn apart when a loved one is imprisoned for practicing their faith.
When you see people in other countries that literally are willing to die rather than to renounce what they believe, certainly gives you a different perspective on life.
Manchin began seeing this last spring after joining the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom. Were you surprised at what a huge issue this is globally?
Yes, because even though I had, I guess, an awareness, had no idea the extent of abuse and violation for human rights as well as religious beliefs.
Made up of 9 members spanning the ideological spectrum, the commission represents different faiths and traditions. And one of the things that you do is you have a prisoner of conscience program. Tell me about that.
We found that if you can put a face to an issue, how much more it resounds with the public and people get the message better.
Case in point, Andrew Brunson, the pastor recently freed after spending 2 years in a Turkish prison. A commissioner adopted Brunson, visited him while captive, and applied pressure on Turkey to release him. Tell me about the folks you've adopted.
Both are from Iran. Mr. Taheri is a writer. He had been taken from prison, was retried and put on death row. And then just recently was taken back out and taken off death row, but his sentence has been extended for 5 more years. Do we hope that perhaps him being a prisoner of conscience helped raise the awareness and took him off death row? We don't know, but we certainly hope so. My other prisoner is a woman, Golrock Irahe. She was writing about the injustice of women being stoned for committing adultery. And for that, she was arrested for breaking Islamic sanctities. Her writings were not even published. They came into her home and confiscated writings and found this and used that against her.
Manchin has learned from Irahi's sister that this attention from America makes a difference.
What I have found in serving on this commission and traveling to other countries, they care about what the United States thinks of them. And the fact that we bring out these violations and discriminations, gives them pause, I believe.
But it takes patience. 9 prisoners of conscience have been released, yet the overall situation grows more serious with each passing day.
It is a commitment and dedication to a large issue, a global issue that is not getting better, unfortunately. It seems like that in many of the countries that we are watching the conditions are deteriorating, not getting better, and so we cannot let up.
The U.S. promotes religious freedom around the world because countries that allow its people to worship freely tend to be friendly neighbors. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Jennifer. No doubt an important issue for Democrats and Republicans to come together to highlight, but wouldn't it be nice to see them come together on many more issues?
Oh, wouldn't that be great in Washington, if only.
If only. Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.
Give me that.